Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. In this video, we're taking a calm journey into the life of one of history's most misunderstood philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche. The man who declared God is dead, who challenged every moral certainty of his time, and who lived most of his life in quiet, painful solitude. This isn't a story of dramatic battles or political revolutions. It's the story of a mind, a brilliant, tortured mind, slowly unfolding across the quiet landscapes of 19th century Europe. We'll walk through university halls, climb Swiss mountain paths, and sit in dim boarding house rooms where one man rewrote how we think about truth, morality, and human existence. Relax, close your eyes, and let's drift into this story together. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. The year is 1844, October 15th. In a small village called Rocken, in the Kingdom of Saxony, a child is born. The village is so small you could walk from one end to the other in less than 10 minutes. There are perhaps a few dozen houses, a church, some fields stretching toward a gray horizon. The sky hangs low and heavy, the way it does in that part of Germany. Thick clouds that seem to press down on the land, making everything feel quiet, enclosed, almost suffocated. The child is named Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, is the village's Lutheran pastor. A gentle man, by all accounts, soft-spoken. The kind of person who moves through rooms without making much noise, who speaks in measured tones from the pulpit each Sunday, whose presence is more felt than announced. The parsonage where Friedrich is born sits right next to the church. It's a modest stone building with thick walls that keep out the cold. In winter, frost forms on the inside of the windows. The rooms smell of wood smoke and old books. Karl Ludwig's study is lined with theological texts, commentaries on scripture, volumes of Lutheran doctrine, philosophical treatises in Latin and German that he's collected over years of study. Friedrich's mother, Franziska, comes from a family of pastors too. The Eulers have been in the clergy for generations. So this child is born into a world saturated with religion, with the rhythms of the Christian calendar, with the language of sin and redemption and grace. Every day begins and ends with prayer. Every meal is preceded by a blessing. The weeks turn around Sundays, and the year turns around Easter and Christmas. For the first few years of his life, Friedrich exists in this small, enclosed world. The parsonage, the church, the graveyard with its tilting headstones, the fields beyond. He's a quiet child, observant. Even as a toddler, he seems to watch more than he participates. His sister Elizabeth is born 2 years after him, and then a younger brother, Ludwig Joseph, 2 years after that. The household is peaceful. Karl Ludwig goes about his pastoral duties, visiting the sick, preparing sermons, conducting services. Franziska manages the home with quiet efficiency. There are routines, patterns, morning prayers, afternoon walks, evening readings. The world outside Rocken might as well not exist. This village is its own small universe. But then, in 1848, when Friedrich is 4 years old, his father begins to change. It starts subtly. Karl Ludwig has always suffered from headaches, but now they become more frequent, more severe. He starts to seem confused sometimes. He'll pause mid-sentence, as if he's forgotten what he was saying. His movements become uncertain. The family calls doctors. They come from Naumburg, the larger town a few miles away, carrying their black leather bags. They examine Karl Ludwig, press their fingers to his wrist, peer into his eyes, ask questions. The diagnosis is vague. Some speak of a softening of the brain. Others mention a fall he had months earlier, a blow to the head that perhaps did more damage than anyone realized at the time. Friedrich watches his father decline. He's too young to fully understand what's happening, but he senses the change in the household. His mother moves more quickly now, her face tight with worry. The relatives come more often, aunts, uncles, grandparents, all speaking in hushed voices in the parlor while Friedrich and Elizabeth are sent upstairs. Karl Ludwig can no longer perform his duties. Another pastor comes to take the services. Karl Ludwig spends most of his time in bed now, or sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at nothing. Sometimes he recognizes his family. Sometimes he doesn't. Then, in July 1849, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche dies. He is only 36 years old. The funeral is a gray, quiet affair. The church fills with villagers. The new pastor delivers the eulogy. Friedrich, not yet 5, stands beside his mother, holding her hand. He doesn't cry. He just watches as they lower his father's coffin into the ground in the churchyard, right outside the church where Karl Ludwig preached for so many years. 6 months later, Friedrich's baby brother Ludwig Joseph also dies. He's only 2. The cause is unclear. Childhood illnesses were common and often fatal in those days. Now there are 2 fresh graves in that churchyard. The parsonage feels empty. It's just Franziska, Friedrich, and Elizabeth now, and they can't stay. The parsonage belongs to the church, to whoever is the current pastor. A new family will move in. So, in the spring of 1850, Franziska packs up their belongings, clothes, books, a few pieces of furniture, and they move to Naumburg. They'll live there with Franziska's mother and her 2 unmarried sisters. A house full of women now. Friedrich is the only male. The move to Naumburg marks the end of Friedrich's early childhood, the end of that enclosed world in Rocken. He'll return to visit his father's grave many times over the years. Even as an adult, even as a famous philosopher, he'll make pilgrimages back to that small churchyard. Something in him never quite left that place. But for now, he's 6 years old, living in a new town, in a house that smells different, surrounded by female relatives who speak in soft voices and move through rooms like ghosts. His childhood from this point on will be shaped by absence, the absence of his father, the absence of male guidance, the weight of being raised by grieving women in a household saturated with piety and loss. The house in Naumburg is narrow and tall, 3 stories, crammed between other houses on a street near the cathedral. It's darker than the parsonage was. The windows are smaller. The rooms are more crowded. Franziska, her mother, her 2 sisters, Friedrich, Elizabeth, all sharing space that was meant for a smaller family. Friedrich's grandmother, Erdmut, is a stern woman. She wears black dresses and keeps her hair pulled back tight. She believes in discipline, in proper behavior, in children being seen but not heard. The 2 aunts, Rosalie and Auguste, are softer but still formal. They move through the house quietly, doing needlework, reading devotional texts, maintaining the routines of a respectable household. Friedrich attends the local preparatory school. He walks there each morning, his books under his arm, through streets that are busier than anything in Rocken. Naumburg isn't a large city, but it's a real town. There are shops, a market square, carriages clattering over cobblestones. The cathedral looms over everything, its twin towers visible from almost anywhere in town. At school, Friedrich is a diligent student. He learns quickly. Reading comes easily to him, and he devours books the way other children devour sweets. By age 7, he's reading far beyond his grade level. By 8, he's attempting to write poems and little plays. He has a gift for language, a sensitivity to words and rhythms that his teachers notice immediately. But he's also a lonely child. He doesn't make friends easily. He's serious, intense, in a way that puts other children off. While they play games in the schoolyard, he often stands to the side, watching, or wanders off to read. He prefers the company of books to the company of his peers. At home, the atmosphere remains heavy. Franziska is a devoted mother, but she's also deeply melancholic. She wears mourning clothes for years. She speaks often of Karl Ludwig, of what a good man he was, of how God must have had a reason for taking him so young. The aunts echo these sentiments. The household is suffused with a kind of resigned sadness, a sense that life is suffering and all we can do is bear it with Christian patience. Friedrich absorbs all of this. He learns, without being explicitly taught, that life is precarious, that loss is always near, that happiness is fleeting. He learns to be quiet, to keep his thoughts to himself, to retreat into books and his own imagination. But he also learns music. One of the aunts plays piano, and she begins to teach Friedrich. He takes to it immediately. Music becomes his other passion, alongside reading. He'll sit at the piano for hours, working through scales and simple pieces, then gradually more complex compositions. He's drawn especially to Beethoven, to the dramatic intensity of those late sonatas and quartets. Years pass like this. Friedrich moves through childhood in this household of women, in this town dominated by its medieval cathedral, studying, reading, playing piano, writing his little poems and stories. He's being shaped, though he doesn't know it yet, into the person who will one day challenge everything this household stands for, the Christianity, the resignation, the acceptance of suffering as God's will. But that's far in the future. For now, he's just a boy, a serious, quiet boy with dark, intense eyes, walking to school through cold German mornings, coming home to a house that smells of cabbage and old wood, sitting at the piano while twilight fills the windows, already sensing, perhaps, that he doesn't quite belong in this world he's been born into. The years move forward slowly in Naumburg. Friedrich grows from a quiet boy into a serious adolescent. By the time he's 14, in 1858, it's clear to everyone that he's intellectually gifted. His teachers at the local gymnasium have been recommending for some time that he receive a more rigorous education than what's available in Naumburg. The family discusses options. Money is tight. They live on Karl Ludwig's modest pension and what little Franziska's family can contribute. But everyone agrees that Friedrich's talents shouldn't be wasted. There's a school called Schulpforta, about 10 miles from Naumburg. It's one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in all of Germany, a former Cistercian monastery converted into an educational institution after the Reformation. It takes only the brightest students, and it prepares them for university. The education is classical, Latin, Greek, ancient history, literature, mathematics, theology. The discipline is strict. Students live on campus, following routines that haven't changed much since the monastery days. Friedrich takes the entrance examination in the fall of 1858. He passes easily. In October, his mother accompanies him to Schulpforta. They travel by coach, the landscape rolling past, fields, forests, small villages. The school buildings appear gradually as they approach. Gray stone structures arranged around courtyards, a chapel with a tall steeple, dormitory buildings with rows of small windows. Franziska hugs her son goodbye. Friedrich watches the coach pull away, then turns to face his new life. He's assigned to a dormitory room he'll share with 3 other boys. The room is austere, 4 narrow beds, 4 small desks, a single window looking out onto a courtyard. The walls are bare stone. It's cold. It's always cold at Schulpforta. The daily routine is rigid. Students wake at 5 in the morning to the sound of a bell. Morning prayers in the chapel, then breakfast, black bread, weak coffee. Classes begin at 6 and continue with brief breaks until late afternoon. Latin grammar, Greek translation, ancient history, mathematics, German composition, religious instruction. Then evening study hours, dinner, evening prayers, and bed by 9. The discipline is severe. Talking during study hours is forbidden. Leaving campus without permission is grounds for expulsion. The teachers, they're called preceptors, are stern men, most of them in their 40s or 50s, who believe that education consists of rigorous memorization, exact translation, and the breaking down of youthful willfulness. Friedrich adapts to this environment, though not easily. He misses home, misses his mother and sister, misses the piano. There's a piano at Solitude, but access to it is limited, and he rarely gets to play. He misses privacy. The dormitory room is always occupied, 4 teenage boys living on top of each other, with nowhere to be alone. But the academics captivate him, especially the classics. Latin he already knows fairly well from his gymnasium studies, but now he's diving deeper, reading Cicero, Virgil, Horace, Tacitus in the original. Greek is newer to him and more difficult, but also more thrilling. His first encounter with Homer, reading the opening lines of the Iliad in Greek, feeling the rhythm of the dactylic hexameter, understanding for the first time that this isn't just a story, but a carefully constructed work of art. This moment stays with him forever. He discovers that ancient Greece was something other than what his Christian upbringing taught him to expect. These weren't primitive people waiting for the light of Christ. They were sophisticated, complex, simultaneously beautiful and brutal. They built the Parthenon and practiced slavery. They wrote sublime poetry and endorsed infanticide. They believed in nothing beyond this life, yet created art that lasted millennia. Friedrich begins to excel at Solitude. By his second year, he's at the top of his class in classics. His Greek compositions are singled out as exemplary. His essays on ancient history show a depth of understanding that surprises his teachers. He wins prizes, scholarships. The school's rector calls him the most promising student they've had in years. But socially, he remains isolated. He makes a few friends, 2 boys named Paul Deussen and Karl von Gersdorf, who share his intellectual interests, but mostly he keeps to himself. During recreation periods, while other boys play games or wrestle or engage in the rough camaraderie of adolescence, Friedrich walks alone in the monastery gardens, or sits in the library, or writes in his notebook. He's writing constantly now. Poetry, mostly. Melancholic verses about loneliness, about longing for something he can't name. Short essays on philosophical topics he doesn't quite understand yet, but is drawn to instinctively. Musical compositions, too. He's teaching himself basic music theory, trying to translate onto paper the sounds he hears in his head. He also writes letters home, long letters to his mother, describing his studies, asking about her health, about Elizabeth, about events in Naumburg. Franziska writes back faithfully. Her letters are full of maternal concern, religious sentiments, small-town news. She's pleased that he's doing well academically, but she worries about his health. Friedrich has always been somewhat frail. He gets headaches, stomach ailments, colds that linger for weeks. She sends him packages of food, warm socks, remedies. The years at Solitude blur together. 1859, 1860, 1861. The same routine, repeated endlessly. Wake, pray, study, eat, study, pray, sleep. The seasons change outside the stone walls. Spring blossoms in the monastery gardens. Summer heat that makes the dormitory stifling. Autumn leaves carpeting the courtyards. Winter cold that seeps through every crack. Friedrich grows taller. His voice deepens. His face loses its boyish roundness. In 1861, when he's 16, something happens that shakes him. One of his classmates, a boy he knew but wasn't particularly close to, commits suicide. The details are hushed up by the school administration, but the students hear fragments. The boy hanged himself in one of the storage buildings late at night. No one knows why. He hadn't seemed especially troubled. The school holds a brief memorial service. The preceptors give stern lectures about the sanctity of life, the sin of suicide, the importance of turning to God in times of despair. But Friedrich, sitting in the chapel pew, feels something else. He feels anger. Anger at the platitudes, at the easy answers, at the way the adults are trying to contain and explain something that's actually inexplicable and terrifying. He thinks about death more after that. His father's death which he witnessed at age 4, comes back to him in dreams. He wonders what it's like to die, whether there's really an afterlife, a heaven where his father and brother are waiting. The religious answers he's been given all his life suddenly seem insufficient, hollow. But he keeps these thoughts to himself. This is Schulpforta, a Christian institution. Doubt is not encouraged. Faith is expected, assumed, enforced through daily prayers and religious instruction. So Friedrich learns to maintain an exterior of conventional piety while his interior life grows more complicated, more questioning. In 1862, he writes an essay for a school assignment on the topic of fate in ancient Greek thought. He argues that the Greeks had a tragic view of existence. They believed humans were subject to forces beyond their control, that the gods were capricious, that suffering was inevitable. This view, he suggests, gave their art a depth that later, more optimistic cultures couldn't achieve. The essay is brilliant but troubling. His teacher gives him high marks, but also writes a note of concern. Beware of allowing admiration for the ancients to undermine Christian faith. Friedrich graduates from Schulpforta in September 1864. He's 20 years old. 6 years at the school have transformed him from a sheltered boy into a serious young scholar. He's mastered Greek and Latin. He's read widely in ancient literature, history, and philosophy. He's developed a rigorous work ethic and a capacity for sustained intellectual concentration. He's also developed chronic health problems. The headaches have worsened. He suffers from insomnia and digestive issues, and a deep sense of isolation. The question now is what to do next. University, certainly, but which one, and what course of study? The obvious path, given his family background, would be theology. Train to become a Lutheran pastor like his father and grandfathers. Take a position in some small parish. Marry a respectable girl. Raise children. Deliver sermons every Sunday until old age or death. But Friedrich feels no calling toward the ministry. The idea fills him with dread. He can't imagine spending his life ministering to village congregations, preaching doctrines he's increasingly uncertain about. What he wants, though he can barely articulate it yet, is to pursue truth wherever it leads, without the constraints of religious dogma. Still, he's dependent on his family for financial support, and they expect him to study theology. So in October 1864, he enrolls at the University of Bonn as a theology student. It's a compromise. He'll study theology, but also classical philology. Maybe he can find a path that satisfies both his family's expectations and his own intellectual needs. Bonn is Friedrich's first real taste of freedom. After 6 years at Schulpforta, with its rigid discipline, university life feels almost anarchic. Students come and go as they please. They attend lectures or don't. They stay up late drinking in taverns. They join fraternal organizations, fight duels over trivial insults, spend their parents' money on fashionable clothes and entertainment. Friedrich tries to participate in this student culture. He joins a fraternity, attends some parties, even drinks beer with classmates in smoky taverns along the Rhine. But his heart isn't in it. The fraternity rituals seem juvenile. The drinking bores him. The easy camaraderie of his classmates, their casual assumptions about life, their unexamined beliefs, their lack of intellectual seriousness, grates on him. What really captures his attention at Bonn is classical philology. He takes lectures from Friedrich Wilhelm Ritschl, one of the leading philologists in Germany. Ritschl is in his 50s, a meticulous scholar who approaches ancient texts with almost scientific precision. He teaches his students to examine every word, every grammatical construction, every textual variant, to reconstruct as accurately as possible what the ancient authors actually wrote and meant. Philology, Friedrich discovers, is detective work. It's about solving puzzles. Why did this scribe make this particular copying error? Which manuscript tradition preserves the most authentic version of this text? What did this word mean in the context of ancient Athens versus ancient Rome? It requires knowledge of history, linguistics, archaeology, literature. It's intellectually demanding and deeply satisfying. Friedrich also attends theology lectures, but his enthusiasm for them is non-existent. The professors discuss fine points of doctrine, biblical interpretation, church history. It all seems abstract, disconnected from real questions about existence and meaning. He goes through the motions, takes notes, passes his examinations, but he knows this isn't his path. After 2 semesters at Bonn in the spring of 1865, he makes a decision. He's going to drop theology and focus entirely on classical philology. This will upset his family. His mother still hopes he'll become a pastor, but he can't continue pretending. He needs to follow his intellectual passion wherever it leads. There's another reason to leave Bonn. Ritschl is moving to the University of Leipzig. Friedrich has impressed Ritschl with his work, and Ritschl has suggested that he continue his studies in Leipzig. So, in October 1865, Friedrich transfers to Leipzig. He's 21 years old, no longer a theology student, now fully committed to the study of the ancient world. Leipzig is a larger city than Bonn, more industrial, less picturesque. The university is prestigious, especially for classical studies. Friedrich rents a small room near the university, a single room this time, his first real privacy since leaving home. The room is on the 3rd floor of a building on Blumengasse. It has a bed, a desk, a chair, a small stove. The window looks out onto a narrow street. He establishes a routine: morning lectures and seminars, afternoons in the university library, working through texts, Plato, Aristotle, the Greek tragedians, the lyric poets, evenings in his room, writing. He's working on several philological projects now, detailed studies of specific textual problems in ancient sources. The work is painstaking, requiring hours of concentration, but it absorbs him completely. He also joins a small student philological society where he and a few other serious students present papers to each other, debate interpretations, critique each other's work. This is the kind of intellectual community he's been craving. Not drunken fraternity bonding, but real exchange of ideas with people who care about the same things he does. In October 1865, something unexpected happens. Friedrich is browsing in a used bookshop near the university, looking for nothing in particular, when he spots a book, The World as Will and Representation by Arthur Schopenhauer. He's heard the name. Schopenhauer is a philosopher, somewhat notorious, definitely not part of the academic mainstream. On impulse, Friedrich buys the book. That night, in his room, he begins reading. And he can't stop. He reads through the night, turning pages by candlelight, his excitement growing with each chapter. Schopenhauer is saying things Friedrich has felt but never seen articulated. That life is suffering. That the will, blind, insatiable desire, drives all existence. That reason is just a tool the will uses to justify its desires. That the world is fundamentally irrational, not the rational, orderly cosmos that Christianity and academic philosophy claim it is. Schopenhauer offers a vision of existence as tragic, meaningless, driven by forces we can't control and don't understand. The only escape, Schopenhauer argues, is through aesthetic contemplation, art, music, which temporarily releases us from the tyranny of the will, or through asceticism, the complete denial of the will, though Schopenhauer admits this is nearly impossible to achieve. Friedrich finishes the book as dawn light fills his window. He feels electrified, transformed. Everything he's been thinking and feeling in fragments suddenly has a coherent philosophical framework. The piety of his childhood, the Christian optimism he's been surrounded by all his life. Schopenhauer tears through it all, showing it as wishful thinking, a refusal to face reality honestly. Over the following weeks and months, Friedrich reads and rereads Schopenhauer. He reads Schopenhauer's other works. He thinks constantly about the implications. If Schopenhauer is right, if the world really is as he describes it, then what? How should one live? What's the point of scholarship, of art, of anything? He has no answers yet, but the questions have taken root. His philological work continues. He's still attending lectures, writing papers, impressing Ritschl with his scholarly abilities. But underneath, something deeper is stirring. A philosophical questioning that will eventually lead him far beyond academic philology toward his own unique philosophical vision. But that's still years away. For now, he's a 21-year-old graduate student, sitting in his small room in Leipzig, reading by lamplight, covering the margins of Schopenhauer's books with his own notes and questions, beginning the long, difficult work of thinking for himself. The semesters pass: 1866, 1867, 1868. Friedrich works harder than almost anyone else in the philology program. He publishes his first scholarly article at age 23, a detailed study of textual sources for Diogenes Laertius, an ancient biographer of philosophers. It appears in a prestigious philological journal. Ritschl is impressed. Other professors take notice. Friedrich's reputation grows within the small world of classical scholarship. He's seen as exceptionally promising, a young scholar with both technical precision and genuine interpretive insight. He understands ancient texts not just as linguistic puzzles, but as products of living cultures, expressions of worldviews radically different from modern Christianity. His health, though, continues to deteriorate. The headaches are now severe and frequent, often incapacitating him for days at a time. He suffers from eye problems, his vision blurs, reading becomes painful. His stomach troubles persist. He tries various remedies, special diets, mineral waters, long walks for exercise, but nothing helps much. In October 1868, something significant happens. Friedrich receives an unexpected offer. The University of Basel in Switzerland needs a professor of classical philology. Their current professor is retiring, and they need someone to take over the position. Ritschl has recommended Friedrich. Despite the fact that Friedrich hasn't yet completed his doctorate or his habilitation, the 2 degrees normally required for a professorship, Basel is willing to hire him based on Ritschl's recommendation and his published work. Friedrich is stunned. He's only 24 years old. To become a full professor at 24 is almost unheard of. Most scholars don't achieve professorships until their 30s or 40s. And Basel, while not one of the most prestigious universities, is respectable. It's a position that would give him financial security, intellectual freedom, and time to pursue his own research. He accepts. Leipzig quickly grants him a doctorate without requiring him to complete the usual examinations. His published work is deemed sufficient. He's now Dr. Friedrich Nietzsche, professor of classical philology at the University of Basel. Before leaving for Switzerland, he has to fulfill one obligation: military service. Prussia requires all young men to serve. Friedrich reports for duty in October 1867, joining an artillery regiment in Naumburg. The military life is physically demanding: marching, weapons training, horse riding. Friedrich, never athletic, struggles with it, and after just a few months he has an accident. While mounting a horse, he's thrown and slams his chest hard against the pommel of the saddle. The injury is serious, possibly cracked ribs, severe bruising. He spends weeks recovering and is eventually discharged from service on medical grounds. In April 1869, Friedrich Nietzsche arrives in Basel to take up his professorship. He's 24 years old. He's achieved, astonishingly early, what most scholars dream of: a secure academic position at a respected university. He has his own apartment, his own lecture hall, eager students, and respected colleagues. But he's also damaged physically, uncertain philosophically, isolated personally. He doesn't know it yet, but this position at Basel will be both the height of his academic career and the beginning of his departure from academic life entirely. The 10 years he'll spend in Basel will see him gradually move from being a promising young philologist to being something else entirely: a cultural critic, a philosopher, a voice howling in the wilderness against everything his civilization holds dear. But that transformation is just beginning. For now, he's Professor Nietzsche, standing before a classroom full of students, lecturing on ancient Greek grammar, trying to ignore the headache that's building behind his eyes, preparing lectures late into the night in his Basel apartment. Still young, still hopeful that scholarship and teaching will provide the meaning and purpose his life requires. Basel in the spring of 1869 is a quiet city on the Rhine, where Switzerland meets France and Germany. The old town clusters around the cathedral, its red sandstone towers rising above narrow medieval streets. The university buildings are modest compared to the grand institutions in German cities: a few lecture halls, a library, administrative offices scattered through several old structures. But the intellectual atmosphere is serious, the students attentive, the colleagues welcoming. Friedrich settles into his apartment on Schutzengasse, a street lined with 4-story buildings near the city center. His rooms are on the second floor, a bedroom, a study, a small sitting area. The study becomes his sanctuary. He arranges his books on shelves, sets up his desk by the window where the light is best, hangs a few prints on the walls. From this window, he can see across rooftops toward the cathedral. Church bells mark the hours, their sound drifting across the city at dawn, noon, and dusk. His teaching duties are substantial but manageable. He lectures on Greek and Latin literature, conducts seminars on textual criticism, oversees student translations. The students are respectful, some genuinely interested. He's not a natural lecturer. His voice is soft. He speaks rapidly. He assumes too much prior knowledge, but his passion for the material comes through. When he discusses a passage from Homer or Sophocles, his face becomes animated. His usual reserve drops away. But teaching, he discovers, drains him. Standing before a classroom for an hour leaves him exhausted. Preparing lectures takes him twice as long as it should because the headaches interrupt his work, forcing him to lie in a darkened room until they pass. The administrative duties, faculty meetings, student consultations, grading examinations, feel like obstacles to real intellectual work. What he really wants is time to think, to read, to write. Not more philological articles, though he continues producing those. Something else. Something that addresses the bigger questions that Schopenhauer awakened in him. Questions about the meaning of existence, the value of culture, the possibility of living truthfully in a world without God. In November 1869, just months after arriving in Basel, something happens that will change the trajectory of his life. He's invited to visit the home of Richard Wagner. Wagner lives in Tribschen, a villa on Lake Lucerne about an hour from Basel by train. He's 56 years old, already famous throughout Europe as the composer of revolutionary operas, Tristan und Isolde, Die Meistersinger, and he's working now on his massive ring cycle. He's also notorious for his huge ego, his political radicalism, his scandalous personal life. He's living with Cosima von Bülow, the daughter of Franz Liszt, who's still technically married to another man. Friedrich has admired Wagner's music for years. He's read Wagner's theoretical writings on art and culture, which argue that modern civilization has lost touch with genuine artistic feeling, that contemporary art is shallow and commercial, that what's needed is a return to something more primal, more mythic. These ideas resonate deeply with Friedrich's own growing sense that something is profoundly wrong with modern European culture. The visit to Tribschen is arranged through a mutual acquaintance. Friedrich takes the train on a gray November afternoon, the landscape outside his window gradually shifting from city to countryside, the lake appearing through mist. He's nervous. Wagner is a cultural giant. Friedrich is just a 25-year-old professor, unknown outside small philological circles. But the meeting exceeds his hopes. Wagner greets him warmly, seems genuinely interested in his ideas. They talk for hours about Greek tragedy, about Schopenhauer, about the state of German culture, about Wagner's compositional process. Cosima joins them, elegant and intelligent, her conversation as stimulating as Wagner's. They serve tea, then dinner. Evening falls. Friedrich misses his train back to Basel, stays overnight, continues the conversation the next morning. He returns to Tribschen the following week, and the week after that. It becomes a pattern. Almost every weekend, Friedrich takes the train to Lucerne, walks up the hill to Wagner's villa, spends Saturday and Sunday in intense conversation with Richard and Cosima, then returns to Basel Sunday evening, exhausted but exhilarated, to prepare his Monday lectures. Tribschen becomes his refuge. Wagner's household is everything his own childhood home wasn't: vibrant, artistic, intellectually adventurous. Wagner holds forth on every topic imaginable, his voice booming, his gestures theatrical. Cosima listens carefully, adds her own sharp observations, manages the household with quiet efficiency. There are other visitors, musicians, writers, artists drawn to Wagner's orbit. Friedrich finds himself playing a particular role in this household. He becomes the appreciative audience, the brilliant young scholar who validates Wagner's ideas, who can discuss Greek culture and Schopenhauer with real depth, who sits at the piano and sight-reads Wagner's latest compositions. Wagner treats him almost like a son, or perhaps, more accurately, like a disciple. In June 1870, Friedrich is at Tribschen when he learns that Cosima and Wagner are finally getting married. Cosima's divorce from Hans von Bülow has been finalized. The wedding is a small, private affair. Friedrich serves as one of the witnesses. He feels honored to be included in such an intimate family moment. But then, in July 1870, war breaks out. France declares war on Prussia. Within weeks, all the German states are mobilized. The Franco-Prussian War has begun. Friedrich, as a Swiss resident and university professor, is technically exempt from military service. Switzerland is neutral. But he feels compelled to participate somehow. He volunteers as a medical orderly. In August, he takes leave from the university and travels to the front. The experience is brief, but shattering. He's assigned to help transport wounded soldiers from battlefield hospitals to medical facilities in the rear. The work involves riding in wagons full of men with horrific injuries, shattered limbs, abdominal wounds, faces destroyed by artillery. The smell is overwhelming: blood, infection, excrement, death. Men scream or moan or lie silent in shock. Many die during transport. Friedrich does this for 10 days. Then he himself falls ill. He contracts dysentery and diphtheria, possibly from exposure to the wounded. He becomes severely sick, feverish, unable to keep down food. He's sent back to Germany to recover. The recovery takes weeks. He spends September in Naumburg, being nursed by his mother and sister, weak and miserable. The illnesses leave him even more physically compromised than before. His digestive system never fully recovers. The headaches and eye problems worsen. He returns to Basel in October, thin and exhausted, wondering if he will be able to resume teaching. But he does resume. The winter semester of 1870 begins. He's back in the classroom, back in his routine, but something has changed. The war has shown him viscerally what suffering means. Not Schopenhauer's abstract philosophical suffering, but real physical agony. Young men dying in wagon beds, their lives ending in pain and confusion for the sake of national ambitions they probably don't understand. He throws himself into a new project. He's going to write a book about the birth of Greek tragedy. This has been brewing in his mind for months, through all those conversations with Wagner. The question is, how did the Greeks, living in a tragic universe where suffering was inevitable and meaningless, create such sublime art? How did Aeschylus and Sophocles transform horror into beauty? He writes in every spare moment. Early mornings before teaching, late nights after lectures. The writing comes in bursts when the headaches recede. His argument is taking shape. Greek tragedy emerged from a fusion of two opposed drives, which he calls the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian is the drive toward form, order, clarity, beautiful appearance. The Dionysian is the drive toward intoxication, dissolution, merging with nature, confronting reality without illusion. The Apollonian alone produces superficial art, pretty but insubstantial. The Dionysian alone produces chaos. But in early Greek tragedy, these drives were held in perfect balance. The chorus represented the Dionysian element, ecstatic, collective, confronting suffering directly. The individual characters and the dramatic structure represented the Apollonian, giving form and meaning to that suffering. Then, according to Friedrich's argument, something happened. Socrates appeared. Socrates represented pure rationalism. the belief that everything can be understood and explained through logical thought, that virtue is knowledge, that the universe is ultimately rational and good. This Socratic optimism killed tragedy. Once Greeks believed that suffering could be explained away, that rational understanding could solve all problems, they lost the ability to face reality tragically. Friedrich's book is also, implicitly, an attack on contemporary culture. Modern Europeans, he suggests, are the inheritors of Socratic rationalism. They believe in progress, in science, in reason's ability to solve all problems and create a better world. But this is delusion. Reality is still tragic. Suffering is still meaningless. Modern culture has just lost the ability to face this honestly and transform it into art. The only hope, Friedrich suggests, is a rebirth of tragic culture. And this rebirth might be beginning in the music dramas of Richard Wagner. Wagner's operas, especially the Ring Cycle, are attempting to do what Greek tragedy once did, confront the depths of existence without illusion and transform that confrontation into overwhelming artistic experience. The book is unconventional, to say the least. It's part philological scholarship, part philosophical essay, part cultural manifesto, part homage to Wagner. It doesn't fit neatly into any established academic genre. But Friedrich feels he's finally saying what needs to be said. He publishes The Birth of Tragedy in January 1872. He's proud of it, excited about it, convinced it will be recognized as an important contribution to understanding Greek culture and modern civilization. The reception is devastating. Academic reviewers savage it. They accuse him of abandoning scholarly rigor, of making wild speculations unsupported by evidence, of letting his enthusiasm for Wagner cloud his judgment about the Greeks. One particularly harsh review comes from Ulrich von Wilamowitz-Moellendorff, a young philologist who will go on to become one of the most respected classicists of his generation. Wilamowitz's review is titled Future Philology, and it's dripping with sarcasm. He accuses Friedrich of betraying classical scholarship, of writing aesthetic mysticism instead of serious philology. The philological community largely agrees with Wilamowitz. Friedrich's reputation as a promising young scholar is badly damaged. Students stop enrolling in his seminars. Colleagues avoid him at faculty gatherings. He feels isolated within the university, like he's committed some unforgivable breach of academic etiquette by writing too passionately, too personally, by trying to make ancient Greece relevant to contemporary concerns. The only people who praise The Birth of Tragedy are those in Wagner's circle. Wagner himself is delighted with it, sees it as a brilliant validation of his artistic project. But this makes things worse in Basel. Now Friedrich is seen not as an independent scholar, but as Wagner's propagandist, a young man who's let himself be seduced by proximity to fame. Friedrich tries to continue his academic work. He still has his teaching duties. He still publishes philological articles. But his heart isn't in it anymore. The institutional constraints of academic life feel suffocating. He can't write what he really thinks without being attacked. He can't pursue the big questions without being accused of abandoning scholarly standards. His health continues declining. The headaches now come several times a week, severe enough that he has to cancel classes, lie in his darkened apartment with cold compresses on his forehead. His vision problems worsen. Reading for more than an hour leaves his eyes burning and watering. His stomach can tolerate only the blandest foods. He's constantly exhausted. He still visits Tribschen, but those visits have changed too. In April 1872, Wagner and Cosima move away. Wagner is establishing a festival theater in Bayreuth, a small town in Bavaria where he'll stage his operas exactly as he envisions them. The departure feels like a loss. Tribschen had been Friedrich's sanctuary, and now it's gone. He visits Bayreuth several times over the next few years, attending planning sessions, watching the festival theater being built, maintaining his friendship with Richard and Cosima. But something is shifting in the relationship. Friedrich is starting to see aspects of Wagner's personality that trouble him. The enormous ego, the anti-Semitism that runs through Wagner's cultural writings, the way Wagner dominates every conversation, the sycophantic circle of admirers who surround him. In 1876, the first Bayreuth Festival takes place. Wagner's Ring Cycle is performed in its entirety for the first time. It's a massive cultural event. Critics, musicians, intellectuals, and wealthy patrons come from across Europe. Friedrich attends, of course. He sits through all 4 operas: Das Rheingold, Die Walküre, Siegfried, Götterdämmerung. Hours and hours of music, of mythic storytelling, of Wagnerian spectacle. But he finds himself strangely unmoved, or not unmoved exactly, but troubled. The music is magnificent, certainly, but the whole atmosphere of the festival disturbs him. The cultish devotion of Wagner's followers, the pompous self-importance, the nationalistic German pride, the wealthy patrons treating the event as a social occasion rather than a serious artistic experience. Is this the rebirth of tragic culture he'd hoped for? It feels more like a grand bourgeois entertainment. During the festival, Friedrich suffers severe headaches. He can barely make it through the performances. Between operas, he escapes to the forest outside Bayreuth, walking alone among the trees, trying to clear his head. After the festival, he doesn't return to Bayreuth. He writes polite letters to Wagner and Cosima, makes excuses about his health, about his university duties, but privately, he's withdrawing from the relationship. He's beginning to realize that he's outgrown Wagner, or perhaps that he never really agreed with Wagner in the first place. He'd been dazzled by Wagner's personality, grateful for the friendship, excited to be close to artistic greatness. But their actual visions of culture, of art, of what humanity needs, these are increasingly divergent. Friedrich is also beginning to see that his attachment to Wagner has held him back. He's been trying to fit his own ideas into Wagner's framework, trying to be Wagner's philosophical voice. But he has his own things to say, his own path to follow. And that path leads away from Bayreuth, away from grand operatic gestures and mythic nationalism, towards something more radical, more solitary, more difficult. In the fall of 1876, he returns to Basel after the summer break. He's 32 years old. His health is terrible. His academic career is stalled. His friendship with Wagner, which had been the most significant relationship of his adult life, is effectively over, even if neither of them has acknowledged it yet. He feels like he's at a crossroads. He can continue as he has been, teaching classes he finds increasingly tedious, maintaining a respectable academic position, managing his illnesses, growing old prematurely in this small Swiss city. Or he can make a break, strike out in a new direction, even if he's not sure yet what that direction is. The winter of 1876 to 77 is especially difficult. Friedrich is sick almost constantly. He misses more than half his scheduled classes. The university is patient, but he knows this can't continue indefinitely. The headaches have become so severe that he sometimes can't leave his apartment for days at a time. His vision is so compromised that he can barely read. He has to dictate letters and writings to friends because writing by hand causes eye strain. He spends long hours alone in his apartment, lying in darkness, thinking about everything he's believed, everything he's worked toward, everything he's hoped for. And slowly, very slowly, he's coming to conclusions that frighten him. What if Schopenhauer and Wagner were wrong? What if the escape from suffering isn't through aesthetic contemplation or mythic art? What if there is no escape, and the task is not to escape but to face reality more honestly than anyone has dared to face it? What if everything he's been taught, Christianity, morality, the belief in truth and progress and human dignity, what if all of that is just elaborate self-deception, humanity's way of avoiding the terrible reality of existence? And if that's true, what then? How does one live? What becomes of values, of meaning, of the possibility of culture and art and human connection? He doesn't have answers yet, but the questions are becoming clearer, sharper, more urgent, and he knows, with increasing certainty, that pursuing these questions will require him to leave behind everything familiar, his academic position, his conventional respectability, his remaining friendships, perhaps even his health and sanity. But he can't not pursue them. The alternative, continuing to live in compromise, in comfortable falsehood, teaching ancient texts while the real questions burn unanswered, has become impossible. So, in the spring of 1877, he begins to plan his exit. Not immediately. He needs the security of his position a bit longer, needs to build up some savings, needs to figure out the practicalities. But the decision is made. He's going to leave Basel, leave academic life, and pursue this terrifying philosophical project wherever it leads. He feels, for the first time in years, a strange sense of freedom. It's the freedom of having nothing left to lose. His academic reputation is already damaged. His health prevents normal life anyway. He has no wife, no children, no deep roots anywhere. He's essentially alone in the world, dependent on his small professor's salary and the meager financial support his mother can provide. But in that aloneness, in that freedom from conventional expectations, perhaps he can finally think clearly. Perhaps he can finally say what needs to be said, write what needs to be written, follow the logic of his ideas to their terrifying conclusions. The sun sets over Basel, casting long shadows across his study. The cathedral bells ring for evening prayers. Friedrich sits at his desk, a blank page before him, a candle flickering in the growing darkness. His head aches, as always. His eyes burn. But his mind is clear, focused, ready to begin the work that will consume the next decade of his life and produce some of the most radical philosophy ever written. He picks up his pen and begins to write. The decision to leave Basel doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly over the years 1877 and 1878, as Friedrich's health deteriorates to the point where teaching becomes genuinely impossible. The university is understanding. They grant him leaves of absence, reduce his teaching load, hope that rest will restore him. But Friedrich knows better. His body is breaking down in ways that rest won't fix. In 1879, at age 34, he formally resigns his professorship. The university grants him a modest pension, 3,000 Swiss francs per year, enough to live on if he's careful, if he stays in cheap boarding houses and lives simply. It's not much, but it's freedom. Freedom from faculty meetings, from lecture preparation, from the pretense of being a respectable academic when his real work lies elsewhere. He becomes a wanderer. For the next decade he has no permanent home. He lives in boarding houses and rented rooms, moving with the seasons, searching for climates that might ease his suffering. Winters in Italy or on the French Riviera where the sun is warm. Summers in the Swiss mountains where the air is clear and cool. He carries his few possessions, some clothes, his notebooks, a few books, from place to place in a small trunk. His routine, wherever he is, becomes ritualized around his illness. He wakes early, often at dawn, because his head is clearest in the morning. He writes for 2 or 3 hours until the headache begins to build. Then he has to stop. He takes a walk if he's able, or lies in darkness if the pain is too severe. In the afternoon, if he has a good day, he might read a little or write letters. Evening is often lost to pain and nausea. His vision is so poor now that he can barely see what he's writing. He develops a cramped, tiny handwriting, pressing his face close to the page. Sometimes he dictates to friends who visit. Sometimes he simply thinks through his ideas during long, lonely walks, trying to hold entire arguments in his head because writing them down is too physically difficult. The isolation is profound. He has a few loyal friends, Peter Gast, a young musician who helps him edit and copy his manuscripts; Franz Overbeck, a theologian from Basel who remains devoted despite disagreeing with Friedrich's philosophy; Malvida von Meisenburg, an older woman who provides maternal concern and occasional financial help. But mostly, he's alone. Days pass where he speaks to no one except his landlady. Yet, in this isolation, in this physical suffering, some of the most radical philosophy ever written begins to emerge. In 1878, he publishes Human, All Too Human, a book of aphorisms that marks his complete break from Wagner and from his earlier Romanticism. The style is different from The Birth of Tragedy. No more grand mythic claims, no more aesthetic mysticism. Instead, sharp, clear, often cutting observations about human nature, morality, culture, and self-deception. He argues that what we call morality is actually just human psychology dressed up in cosmic significance, that our highest values, compassion, selflessness, truth-seeking, emerged not from divine revelation, but from very earthly needs and power dynamics, that the distinction between good and evil isn't absolute, but historical, contingent, serving particular human interests. He sends a copy to Wagner. Wagner is appalled. This isn't what he expected from his young disciple. This is cold, analytical, skeptical, everything Wagner's romantic nationalism opposed. The friendship, already strained, effectively ends. They never see each other again. Friedrich feels the loss. Wagner had been his great hope, his model of artistic genius, his surrogate father. But he also feels relief. He's finally free to think his own thoughts without trying to reconcile them with Wagner's vision. Over the next several years, he continues writing in this new aphoristic style. Daybreak appears in 1881, then The Gay Science in 1882. The titles are ironic. There's nothing cheerful about most of the content. He's systematically dismantling every comfortable belief European civilization rests on. He argues that Christianity is a religion of resentment, created by the weak to revenge themselves against the strong. That scientific truth-seeking is just another form of asceticism, another denial of life. That morality enslaves us by making us judge ourselves according to standards that have nothing to do with our actual flourishing. That the belief in human equality is a lie that levels everyone down to mediocrity. These are dangerous ideas. He knows they're dangerous, but he can't stop himself. The logic of his thinking drives him forward. If God doesn't exist, if there's no transcendent source of values, then all our moral beliefs are just human constructions. And if they're human constructions, we can unmake them. We can create new values. But what values? Based on what? This is the question that haunts him. He writes it explicitly in The Gay Science. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? In the summer of 1881, something extraordinary happens. Friedrich is in Sils Maria, a tiny village in the Swiss Alps. It's breathtakingly beautiful there. Mountains rising sharply on all sides, the lake reflecting the sky, forests of larch and pine. The air at that altitude is thin and clear. He's taking one of his long walks, circling the lake, when an idea strikes him with such force that he has to sit down. The idea of eternal return. What if, he thinks, this life, with all its suffering, all its joy, all its meaninglessness, what if it repeats eternally? What if you had to live this exact life over and over, every pain, every humiliation, every moment of boredom, infinitely? The thought is terrible. Most people would be crushed by it, but Friedrich sees in it a challenge, a test. Could you live in such a way that you would will the eternal return of your life? Could you affirm existence so completely that you'd want to live it again and again forever? This becomes the test of life affirmation. Not escape into some imaginary afterlife, not consolation through art or philosophy, but total affirmation of existence exactly as it is, in all its terrible beauty and beautiful terror. He begins sketching plans for a new book, one that will express this vision, not in philosophical arguments, not in aphorisms, but in a kind of prose poetry, a philosophical epic. The book will be called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. But before he can fully dive into that project, something else happens. In the spring of 1882 in Rome, Friedrich meets Lou Salome. Lou is 21 years old, brilliant, beautiful, fiercely independent. She's Russian, raised in St. Petersburg, now traveling through Europe pursuing intellectual interests and resisting all attempts to make her marry and settle down. Friedrich is introduced to her by a mutual friend, and he's immediately fascinated. Here's someone who can match him intellectually, who isn't frightened by his ideas, who seems to understand what he's trying to do. They spend weeks together that spring and summer, along with Paul Ray, another philosopher friend of Friedrich's. They travel. They talk endlessly about philosophy and psychology and culture. Friedrich falls in love, or thinks he does. He proposes marriage. Lou refuses. He proposes that they live together in an intellectual commune with Ray. Lou is interested in the idea, but on her own terms, not as anyone's wife or subordinate. The situation becomes complicated, emotional, messy. Elizabeth, Friedrich's sister, gets involved and tries to control things. She's intensely jealous of Lou, seeing her as a threat to her own influence over her brother. She spreads rumors, interferes, creates conflicts. Franziska, Friedrich's mother, is scandalized by the whole arrangement, her son living with an unmarried young woman. By fall, the whole thing falls apart. Lou and Ray end up together, leaving Friedrich behind. He's devastated, humiliated, lonely. He retreats to Rapallo on the Italian coast to nurse his wounded pride and failing health. But out of this pain comes Zarathustra. Through the winter of 1882 to 1883, Friedrich writes furiously. The book pours out of him in a way nothing else ever has. 10 days of intense writing for part 1. The prose is unlike anything he's written before, lyrical, prophetic, full of parables and speeches and poems. Zarathustra is a Persian prophet who descends from his mountain cave after 10 years of solitude to teach humanity. But what he teaches isn't a new religion. It's the death of God, the eternal return, the Übermensch, the human being who creates their own values, who affirms life completely, who needs no external justification for existence. The book is strange, difficult, often beautiful. It's part philosophical tract, part spiritual epic, part parody of the Bible and of romantic philosophy. It works on multiple levels, as serious philosophy, as psychological autobiography, as literary experiment. Friedrich knows it's his most important work. He writes 3 more parts over the following years, each expanding and complicating the vision. But finding a publisher is difficult. Regular publishers don't know what to make of it. Eventually, he has to pay to have Part 4 printed himself, and even then he only prints 40 copies, distributed to friends. The reception, such as it is, confirms his sense of being utterly alone. Almost no one understands what he's trying to do. Critics ignore it or dismiss it as obscure nonsense. His few friends read it with confusion or concern. Only a handful of people glimpse what he's attempting. A complete revaluation of values, a new beginning for philosophy and culture after the death of God. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who declared God dead and spent his life wrestling with what comes after that declaration. We've walked with him from a quiet parsonage in Saxony through the disciplined halls of Schultforta, into the intoxicating friendship with Wagner, and finally into the solitary wandering years where his most radical ideas took form. This is where we'll rest for now. If you enjoyed this slow journey through history, please like this video, subscribe to Boring History for Sleep, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from and which historical figure you'd like us to explore next. Sleep well, and remember, sometimes the most interesting lives are the quietest ones, unfolding slowly in rented rooms in mountain villages, one painful thought at a time. Good night.